The courtroom was completely silent. Not a single whisper. Not a single movement. All eyes were locked on the judge, an older man with neatly combed silver hair and thick glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He slowly leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the young boy standing before him. A boy just 12 years old. A black boy. But there was something different about him. Something striking. Unlike most kids his age, he didn't fidget, didn't shuffle nervously. No fear in his stance. He stood tall, his posture firm, his sharp brown eyes locked onto the judge's. A slow grin spread across the judge's face as he tapped his gavel lightly against the wooden desk. Tap, tap. His amusement was obvious. "All right, young man," the judge said, his voice both playful and firm. "Let's play a little game, truth or lie. I'll ask you a series of questions, and we'll see if you can outsmart me. Sound fair?" A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom like a wave, some chuckling quietly while others exchanged curious glances. But the boy, dressed in a neatly pressed suit that was clearly a size too big for his small frame, did not laugh. Not even a smile. He simply nodded, his expression calm, composed. He was ready. The judge cleared his throat, leaning back into his chair, his grin widening. "First question," he began, pausing slightly for effect. "The law states that a person is innocent until proven guilty. Truth or lies?" The boy didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. His answer was immediate. "Lie." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A few people even leaned forward in their seats. The judge's amused expression faltered just slightly. His eyebrow arched. "Oh, and why is that?" The boy met his gaze without flinching. "Because in reality, people are treated as guilty first and have to fight to prove their innocence," he said smoothly. Then, without breaking eye contact, he added, "especially if they're black." Silence. Thick. Heavy. The judge's grin faded as he shifted in his seat, glancing toward the audience. Some murmured in agreement, nodding to themselves. Others whispered in hushed voices, clearly unsettled. The judge cleared his throat again, his playful tone now tinged with something else, something more serious. "All right," he said, voice steadier. "Let's try another one." He adjusted his glasses. A judge must be completely fair and unbiased in every case. Truth or lies? This time, the boy's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. A flicker of something sharp, something confident, danced in his eyes. "Lie?" The judge frowned, his patience beginning to waver. "Explain." "Because judges are human," the boy responded without missing a beat, his voice steady. "And humans have biases, whether they admit it or not." He tilted his head slightly. "You, for example, have already decided that I'm just a kid who doesn't know what he's talking about. That's your bias." A stunned silence filled the room before the murmurs started again, louder this time. The judge's face darkened, his fingers tightening around the gavel. Crack. The sharp sound echoed through the courtroom as he slammed it against the desk. "Order," he barked. The room fell silent again. The judge exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple, realizing something unsettling, something he hadn't expected. This wasn't just a simple game anymore. It wasn't just a lesson in humility for a cocky kid. No, he had underestimated him. And now he was beginning to suspect he was about to lose. Earlier that day, the courtroom had been buzzing with anticipation. The case had taken over the city, capturing headlines, sparking debates. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras flashing, pens scribbling furiously as they whispered amongst themselves. An unfair arrest, a child genius, and a judge with a reputation for delivering harsh sentences. At the center of it all stood 12-year-old Marcus Jackson. His hands were neatly folded in front of him, standing between his mother and his public defender. But unlike most kids facing a courtroom full of strangers, he wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. The arrest had been a mistake, or at least, that's what the police wanted people to believe. Marcus had been sitting in the public library, lost in the pages of a book about constitutional law, when officers stormed in, accusing him of being involved in a burglary. Their evidence? A vague description. A black boy in a hoodie. Never mind that Marcus had been quietly reading when they slapped the cuffs on him. Never mind that he had zero connection to the crime. The video of his arrest had spread across the internet like wildfire. Outrage followed. But outrage wasn't justice. And now, here he was. Judge Richard Wallace, a man known for his strict rulings, studied the boy from behind his glasses. "Son, do you understand why you're here today?" Marcus lifted his chin. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you know what you're being accused of?" "Yes." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Do you have anything to say before we begin?" A pause. A brief hesitation. Then, "I'd like to represent myself." A stunned gasp swept through the courtroom. His mother's grip tightened around his arm. "Marcus," she whispered, but he only shook his head. His decision was made. Judge Wallace blinked. Then, after a beat, a small chuckle rumbled from his throat. "You want to act as your own lawyers?" "Yes." The judge pursed his lips, tapping his fingers against the bench. "That's bold." "Smart," Marcus corrected. A few more whispers rippled through the audience. The judge chuckled again, shaking his head. "All right then, young man. Let's see if you're as smart as you think you are." And just like that, it began. A game. A test. A battle of wits. A seasoned judge. A 12-year-old prodigy. The courtroom leaned in, eager to witness what was about to unfold. But what no one, not even the judge, realized was that this wouldn't be just another legal proceeding. No. Marcus Jackson was about to flip this entire case upside down. And Judge Wallace? He was about to learn something terrifying. He was losing control. The tension in the courtroom was thick, almost suffocating. It was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a battle of intellect, a test of truth and justice. And at the center of it all, 12-year-old Marcus Jackson stood with the unwavering composure of someone twice his age. Judge Wallace leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on the boy. "All right, Marcus," he said, his voice carrying both curiosity and challenge. "Since you've chosen to represent yourself, I'll give you the chance to make an opening statement. Let's see just how well you understand the law." A murmur rippled through the audience. The reporters in the back stopped their frantic note-taking, their cameras poised, ready to capture every second of this unusual trial. Marcus gave a firm nod, stepping forward with the confidence of a seasoned attorney. His suit still hung loosely on his frame, the sleeves slightly too long, the shoulders a bit too wide. But suddenly, no one noticed that anymore. The room wasn't filled by his clothing, it was filled by him. His presence, his voice, his undeniable command over the moment. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and steady, "I stand before you today not just as a defendant, but as an example of a system that is deeply flawed. I was arrested without probable cause. I was accused based on nothing more than my skin color and the assumption that I must be guilty. But today I will prove that the law, your law, was broken. And not by me, but by those who put me in handcuffs." A stunned silence fell over the room. Even the courtroom stenographer, whose hands had been clacking furiously against the keyboard, paused mid-sentence. The judge tapped his fingers against the bench, his expression unreadable. "That's a strong accusation, young man," he said at last, his tone measured. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "It's not an accusation, Your Honor," he said. "It's a fact." The murmurs in the audience grew louder. The judge exhaled slowly, then turned to the prosecutor, a tall man in a crisp navy suit, his expression calm but calculating. "Mr. Callahan," Judge Wallace said, adjusting his glasses, "I assume the state is ready to present its evidence." Callahan stood, his smirk barely concealed. Like everyone else, he had underestimated the boy. But now, he was ready to put him in his place. "Absolutely, Your Honor," he said smoothly, stepping forward. "The state has surveillance footage placing the defendant near the scene of the crime, as well as a witness who identified him." Marcus didn't flinch. His face remained impassive, but his sharp mind was already breaking apart every word Callahan had just said. "Objection?" Judge Wallace raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" Marcus clasped his hands behind his back, his voice steady. On the grounds that being near a crime is not the same as committing one, he said. And I'd like to see this so-called footage. The judge nodded. Let's see it. A screen flickered to life at the front of the courtroom. The grainy black and white video began to play, showing a figure in a hoodie walking past a convenience store. The footage was dark, the person's face barely visible. This, Callahan announced confidently, was taken just minutes before the store was broken into. The individual in the video matches the description given by our witness. Marcus slowly folded his arms across his chest. He let the silence linger for a moment before responding. What description? Callahan frowned. Excuse me? You said I matched the description, Marcus repeated, his tone patient but firm. So, what was the description? The prosecutor glanced at his notes before answering. The suspect was described as a young black male wearing a hoodie. Marcus exhaled slowly, deliberately. So, to be clear, he said, his voice ringing through the courtroom, the only reason I was arrested was because I'm a black kid wearing a hoodie? Another ripple of murmurs swept through the room. A few members of the jury exchanged glances. Callahan's jaw tightened. You were in the area, and the witness confirmed. Marcus cut in smoothly. Which witness? The prosecutor let out a frustrated sigh. We'll be bringing them in to testify shortly. Marcus nodded. Good, he said. Because I have a few questions for them. Judge Wallace held up a hand, his expression shifting. Let's keep this moving, he said, his voice carrying more weight now. He turned back to Callahan. Mr. Callahan, do you have any stronger evidence than a blurry video and a vague description? The prosecutor hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking his head. Not at this time, Your Honor. A small, knowing smile touched Marcus's lips. Interesting. The judge leaned forward slightly. All right, Marcus, he said. Since you're so confident, why don't you tell us where you were at the time of the crime? Marcus adjusted his tie. Gladly, he said. I was at the city library. Callahan let out a short laugh. And can you prove that? Yes, Marcus said, his tone unwavering. And I can prove something even more interesting. The judge's eyes narrowed. And what's that? Marcus turned toward the bailiff. Your Honor, I'd like to submit my library checkout records as evidence. A hush fell over the room. The bailiff took a manila folder and brought it to the judge, who opened it, scanning the document with an unreadable expression. After a long moment, he sighed. This receipt shows that you checked out a book at 8:42 p.m. Exactly, Marcus said, his voice sharp. And the store was robbed at 8:40 p.m. There's no way I could have done it. A flicker of realization crossed Callahan's face, his smirk vanishing. Marcus turned toward him, his voice calm but firm. You arrested me with no real evidence. You brought me here with nothing but assumptions. And now, your entire case is falling apart because you underestimated me. Judge Wallace rubbed his temple, exhaling heavily. All right, he said at last. We'll take a short recess. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. He banged his gavel, and people stood, stretching. But just as the courtroom doors swung open, a police officer rushed in, panting, his face pale. Your Honor, he called breathlessly. We just got a report. The real suspect has been caught. And he already confessed. The room froze. Every head turned toward Marcus. But he didn't say a word. He simply smiled. A heavy silence settled over the courtroom. The officer, still catching his breath, held up another manila folder. The real suspect was caught breaking into another store just 15 minutes ago. When questioned, he confessed to both crimes, including the one Marcus was accused of. Judge Wallace's fingers tapped against his desk, his expression darkening. He turned slowly to Marcus. The 12-year-old stood tall, his expression unreadable. The judge's voice was low, measured. Officer, he said, are you telling me that we've been putting this boy on trial for a crime that someone else just admitted to? The officer shifted uncomfortably. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom exploded into noise, reporters furiously jotting notes, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Marcus's mother clutched her chest, tears welling in her eyes. And Marcus? He just stood there, silent. Because he had known all along.